Chapter 1 of What I Believe. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. What I Believe by Count Leo Tolstoy. Translated from the Russian by Konstantin Popov. Read by David Barnes. Chapter 1. I have endeavoured to explain the reason why I had not properly understood the doctrine of Christ in my two works, a criticism on dogmatic theology and a new translation and comparison of the four Gospels with a commentary. In these works I examine all that conceals the truth from the eyes of men, and also retranslate and compare the four Gospels verse by verse. I have been engaged for some 6 years upon this work. Every year, every month, I find new solutions and suggestions, and I am enabled to correct the defects that creep in through haste or impulse. My life will perhaps end before the work is complete, but I am sure that it is a much needed labour I have imposed on myself, and therefore I shall do what I can while my life lasts. This is my outward work on the theology of the Gospel, but the inner working of my soul, which I wish to speak of here, was not the result of a methodical investigation of doctrinal theology, or of the actual texts of the Gospel. It was a sudden removal of all that hid the true meaning of the Christian doctrine, a momentary flash of light which made everything clear to me. It was something like that which might happen to a man who, after vainly attempting by a false plan to build up a statue out of a confused heap of small pieces of marble, suddenly guesses at the figure they are intended to form by the shape of the largest piece, and then, on beginning to set up the statue, finds his guess confirmed by the harmonious joining in of the various pieces. I wish to tell in this work how I found the key to the doctrine of Christ, by the help of which the truth was disclosed to me so clearly and convincingly. I made the discovery in the following manner. Almost from the first years of my childhood, when I began to read the Gospel for myself, the doctrine that teaches love, humility, meekness, self-denial, and returning good for evil was the doctrine that touched me most. I always considered it as the basic teaching of Christianity, and loved it as such. But it was only after a long period of unbelief that its full meaning flashed upon me, that I understood life as our unlettered working classes understand it, and accepted the same creed that they profess, the creed of the Greek Orthodox Church. But I soon observed that I should not find in the teaching of the Church the confirmation of my idea that love, humility, meekness, and self-denial were the essential principles of Christianity. I saw that this, which I regarded as the basis of Christianity, did not form the main point in the public teaching of the Church. At first I did not attach much importance to this. The Church, I said to myself, acknowledges, beside the doctrine of love, humility, and self-denial, a dogmatic and ritualistic doctrine. This estranges my heart. It is even repulsive to me, but there is no harm in it. While, however, submitting to the teaching of the Church, I began to see more and more clearly that this peculiarity was not as unimportant as I had at first regarded it. I was drawn away from the Church by various singularities in its dogmas, by its approval of persecution, capital punishment, and war, and also by its intolerance of all other forms of worship than its own. But my faith in the teaching of the Church was shaken still more by its indifference to what seemed to me the very basis of the teaching of Christ, and by its evident partiality for what I could not consider an essential part of that doctrine. I felt that there was something wrong, but I could not make out distinctly what it was, because the Church did not deny what seemed to me the main point in the doctrine of Christ, though it failed to give it its proper position and influence. I only passed from nihilism to the Church because I felt the impossibility of living without faith, without a knowledge of what is good and evil, resting on something more than my animal instincts. I hoped to find this something in Christianity. But Christianity, as it appeared to me then, was only a certain disposition of mind, and a very vague one. I turned to the Church for obligatory precepts of life, but the Church gave me only such as did not draw me nearer to the Christian state of mind I longed for, but rather alienated me from it. I turned away from the Church. For the precepts that were given to me by the Church concerning belief in dogmas, observance of the sacraments, fast days and prayers I did not care, and precepts really founded on the teachings of Christ were wanting. Moreover, the precepts of the Church weakened and sometimes even destroyed that Christian state of mind that alone seemed to me to be the true aim of life. What perplexed me most of all was that all the evil things that men do, such as condemning private individuals, whole nations, or other religions, and the inevitable results of these condemnations, executions and wars, were justified by the Church. I saw that the doctrine of Christ, which teaches us humility, tolerance, forgiveness, self-denial and love, was extolled by the Church, but at the same time she sanctioned what was incompatible with such teachings. Could the doctrine of Christ be so weak and inconsistent? That I could not believe. Besides, it had always perplexed me to find that the texts upon which the Church has grounded her dogmas are of an obscure character, whereas those that teach us how to live are the most simple and clear. While the Church specifies the dogmas and the duties derived from them in the most forcible manner, the practice of the doctrine is urged only in obscure, dim, and mystical expressions. Is it possible that this was what Christ desired for his teaching? I could only find the solution of my doubts in the perusal of the Gospels, and I read them over and over again. Of all the Gospels, the Sermon on the Mount was the portion that impressed me most, and I studied it more often than any other part. Nowhere else does Christ speak with such solemnity. Nowhere else does he give us so many clear and intelligible moral precepts, which commend themselves to everyone. If there are any clear and definite precepts of Christianity, they must have been expressed in this sermon, and therefore, in those 3 chapters of St. Matthew's Gospel, I sought the solution of my doubts. Many and many a time I read over the sermon, and every time I felt the same emotion on reading the texts about turning my cheek to the one who strikes me, giving up my cloak to him who takes my coat, being at peace with all men, and loving my enemies. And yet there remained in me the same feeling of dissatisfaction. The words of God were not as yet clear to me. They seemed to enjoin an impossible self-denial that annulled life itself, and therefore it seemed to me that such self-denial could not be the requirement on which man's salvation depended. But then, if that were not the express condition of salvation, there was nothing fixed and clear. I not only read the Sermon on the Mount, but the rest of the Gospels, and various commentaries on them. Our theological explanations tell us that in the teachings of the Sermon of the Mount, an indication is given of the perfection after which man must strive, that man, being full of sin, cannot attain this perfection by his own unaided strength, and that the salvation of man lies in faith, prayer, and the gifts of the grace of God. But these explanations did not satisfy me. Why should Christ have given to us such clear and good precepts, applicable to us all, if he knew beforehand that the keeping of them was impossible by man in his own unaided strength? On reading over these precepts, it always seemed that they applied to